all the time. So we just need to make sure we stay on top of it, which is what we do. So when it comes to the question around vaccinations and whether or not they can be mandated, the federal government's official position is still that vaccination in Australia is voluntary. That being said, that the federal government has a public health order in place that makes it mandatory for aged care workers to be vaccinated. Now, alongside the federal government's position, you've also got to take into account the individual state and territory public orders. So, for example, in New South Wales, there is a public order for care workers, so whether that's aged care, childcare, schools, they need to be vaccinated unless there's a medical clearance. And in the case of Victoria, they've gone even further and recently issued a direction for quite a long list of professions. So the situation, whilst there's some consistency, there's also some differences. I think the other thing that's kind of interesting, and this is more recent developments, is an increasing number of Australian employers are now mandating vaccinations. So you might remember SPC in Victoria. They were the first to come out. But now they've been joined by companies such as Qantas, Telstra, Virgin Australia, I believe. I think Deloitte announced also that they were making vaccinations mandatory. And I've read recently that Mona in Tasmania, they're making vaccinations mandatory for their staff that work there as well. So it's a tricky question, no clear answer. You know, what we're doing is, rather than kind of having discussions about mandating vaccinations, which is a bit of a stick approach, we're instead adopting more of the carrot approach. So, for example, all of our clients gave staff 2 paid half days leave to get the vaccination, and there's additional sick leave in place as well for those that might have suffered any adverse effects of that. So sorry, it's not clearer, but that's what we're dealing with.
Is it, Claire, does it vary a little bit too on the type of workplace as well? Are there some businesses, I mean, you mentioned SPC, where they are obviously dealing in products that are going out to the public, so there's greater health concerns, or if it's a workplace where there's a higher level of interaction with the public, are those types of businesses tending to be on stronger grounds to mandate vaccination? Are they in a position to say, look, it's a necessity for you to fulfill your job? And well,
that's in fact what they have. Yeah, that's what they have said. There's this legal concept called a reasonable direction. Now, reasonable direction, there's a whole bunch of factors that would mean that you can make a reasonable direction for someone to be vaccinated. In fact, I had this discussion with the employment lawyers that we work with, and they're kind of landing there. They're landing, they think that that's the position that employers will take. Look, we have work health safety obligations to the rest of our teams, and therefore we think it's a reasonable direction to require you to be mandated, and not just staff, but also customers or clients. We have one client, for example, their whole business revolves around the fact that they must be on site with their clients. So they will have to mandate vaccination, I suspect, because their clients are demanding that of them as a provider. So reasonable direction, we're hearing that a lot at the moment. We're seeing it challenged a bit at the moment in the courts as well, not with our clients, but certainly in the courts. We've seen some people go up and challenge that, i.e. I think this does not come under the legal definition of a reasonable direction. So once again, it's all playing out, and we keep our eye on that very closely. So it's a moving feast.
So hopefully some of these decisions are decided reasonably soon to provide a little bit more clarity. And admitting that there's not that clarity there quite yet, but if an employer has said, look, made a decision to say, look, it's a reasonable direction for our workplace to require vaccination, what should an employer do if they have an employee who just refuses to be vaccinated? So there's no medical grounds, there's nothing like that, and they just say, look, flat out, don't agree with it, not doing it.
It's tricky, right? Because if you go back to the comment I made originally, which is that it's the federal government's position that vaccinations are still voluntary, at a business level, you're kind of moving away from that. So still, unless the business is under a public order, or actually the other thing is if it's a requirement under some type of enterprise agreement, I'm just not sure you'd have a leg to stand on there. But then we come back again to this reasonable direction or reasonable request, which, is still playing out. It is pretty grey. There's no doubt about that. There are also other legislative frameworks that need to be taken into account as well, such as, certainly Fair Work is the obvious one, but also anti-discrimination legislation. People may say, well, it's against my religion or my beliefs to be vaccinated. And, you're kind of treading on dangerous ground there if you try and mandate that if somebody claims or we see it as discriminatory practice.
So what would you recommend that, say, if a workplace is in that situation where, and most workplaces, if you look at the percentages, 8 out of 10, maybe even 9 out of 10 people will be vaccinated, but there will be people that aren't.
Yeah.
If they do have that issue with an employee, what would you recommend they do? Look,
again, well, what we are doing, because we're seeing this now, I mean, we're dealing with this now. So what we are doing is taking a highly consultative approach. There's your obligations under legislation, and, that's one thing. But really, when it comes to running a business, you've got to really think a bit more pragmatically than that as well. So we are looking at it. We do have a few of those cases that we're advising on right now, and we're taking very much a consultative approach and looking at it case by case. So in one case, for example, there's one and I wouldn't, in fact, the reason for the vaccination hesitancy is medically related, but it wouldn't qualify to come under a medical exemption. So that's, that's tricky. But in that case, that particular role can be performed outside of the office. So we'll just make that a permanent work from home role. And that's fine. That won't be business interruptive at all. So that's okay. In another case, and this one has popped up a couple of times, someone's vaccine hesitant. They're making the decision not to be vaccinated at the moment. But then, somebody else in the team has a sick relative or someone they're in contact with a lot. So then that puts them, the decision goes beyond the individual in some cases. So that puts them in the point, well, what do I do? Do I come into the office or do I stay away until this situation changes? Look, if alternative work arrangements can be offered, start there.
Yep.
And then just keep talking. I happen to think that when we start getting more used to this, that fear aspect will diminish. Whether, working alongside somebody who's unvaccinated. I mean, at the moment, our colleagues who are unvaccinated don't have the same freedoms as those that are vaccinated, right? So I think once we just start getting used to it at a community level, that will also transfer into the business level as well. And, I look at the UK and the US, and that seems to have been what's happened there as well. One of the other things that I think, in fact, this is as recent as yesterday, I'm not sure if you've caught up on this, but the TGA have now approved testing at home. I'm not sure if you heard that yesterday. Yeah, so that's another pragmatic strategy that employers can adopt. So at the moment, the fast testing kits, the testing needs to be done on a site. But the TGA have announced that from 1st of November, those tests will be allowed to be done from home, which kind of makes a lot of sense, because if you think about it, if they had to be done on site, so someone's traveling to their office location, they're stopping for their coffee along the way, they get to the office, they do their test, guess what? It's positive. Then you've got to go back and say, okay, how many people have been impacted by what I've done in the last few hours?
Yes. Yeah.
So I think that's a really sensible decision to allow people to do that from home. And that follows the practice in the US and the UK, which has been in place for months, if not longer. I mean, you pick up the testing kits on, your way out of 7-Eleven over there, and you have a bunch of them sitting at home. I know that because my daughter lived over there until just recently, and that's what she used to do. She just used to test at home.
Okay, so it's for an employer, it's be open in the communication, be pragmatic.
Absolutely.
If there's alternative arrangements that can be made, make those alternative arrangements.
That's it.
And in the meantime, or at some point in the future, they'll probably, hopefully, with our fingers crossed, there'll be a bit of clarity from a legal point of view.
I think that's
well.
right. And then the supply of the testing kits, I think that'll make a big difference as well. And people are generally pretty responsible on that stuff. That's certainly been the practice overseas, and they will test.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I think there's a lot we can learn from what's happening overseas
Yeah,
to sort of give us a bit of an idea of what's happening. And,
yeah, for sure.
And by extension from the obligation that businesses have with their employees, how much do we know about what obligations or responsibilities are going to be placed on businesses to check the vaccination status for everyone else entering the workplace as well? So not just employees, but people external to the business. What
we're kind of we're seeing it now, with New South Wales opening up. We know that hospitality, gyms, hairdressers, they're all under the public direction to check vaccination status, right? So that's already happening. However, outside of that, so again, that comes under that sort of public health order umbrella, but outside of that, it does become a little bit trickier, because asking somebody about their vaccination status is actually asking them about health information. So I'm going to give you another law, which then starts to bring in obligations under the Privacy Act.
Yes. Yep.
So, as you said before, it'll be good to get some clarity around some of these things. But, under the Privacy Act, again, the reasonable test comes into play. If an employee consents, there's no problem, but it is considered sensitive information.
And Claire, on the privacy side of things too, is there a certain threshold at which a business above a certain turnover automatically falls within obligations under the Privacy Act as well that people need to be aware of?
Yeah, there's for businesses, I believe it's turnover of over 3 million.
Okay.
Now I'd have to check my facts on this, but this is something that we came across last week. Well, we've come across two different versions of this. One source of information we have is that you can't physically store a copy of a certificate. However, I've read something since even last week, and certainly in Victoria, I believe you can. So again, it's going to differ state by state. So definitely, as this all plays out, we might get more clarity, but that will probably be an area where people might either need to seek even more legal advice. We're not lawyers. We know when you need them, though. And that will be an area that we're going to keep our ear to the ground on. Whether or not, because we've heard two different versions of that from two different legal firms.
Okay. But I guess that's an important caution, though, that it's obviously we've got to be aware of our obligations to keep the workplace and the general business safe. But we've also got to make sure we're not breaching any privacy regulations as well.
Absolutely. And I think also that 3 million turnover figure, I'm quite sure it's 3 million actually, that is an important number to keep in mind. If your revenue is over 3 million, your obligations are highly likely to be quite different to being under 3 million in revenue.
Okay. No, that's something that definitely falls under the category of you don't know what you don't know. And a lot of people would be caught out by that. So that's really good information. A little bit related to, but a little bit sitting next to vaccinations and everything, more in general, what are you noticing in workplaces now that New South Wales are starting to reopen? And this might play out over the next few months and the next year or so. But from the clients that you have, and you've got a wide range of them, what sort of changes to workplaces do you think are going to stick and be more permanent changes compared to pre-COVID that employers need to be open to and aware of?
Oh, I think hybrid models are here to stay. Hybrid work arrangements are here to stay. Every single one of our clients is adopting that approach now. I was talking to a client the other day. They're kind of mandating for people to work from home at least one day a week. We have another client who last year actually they went completely remote and don't plan to take up the office space that they used to have before. They're working more in one of those shared workspaces, and they kind of people book in to come into the office. Then we have other clients who like to have kind of like an office day for everyone. So where the physical distancing allows them to do that, they'll have everybody in the office for, say, a Friday, just so they can kind of build that those worker and interpersonal relationships a little bit more. So I definitely think hybrid models are here to stay. And in fact, I know from recruitment contacts that if companies are not offering those flexible work arrangements, candidates are going elsewhere.
Okay.
They're absolutely looking for it, which I think is great. I mean, we've proven it can work, right?
Yeah.
So I understand that. I think in the short term, at least, the distancing principles will still apply. As people start to return to the office environment, there is a requirement to do a risk assessment.
Yep.
How adequate is the office to support the health and safety of employees? So I think physical distancing will apply for, certainly, as I said, the short term, probably the medium term. So that I don't expect to see any change there. The other thing actually that we've read recently, and I would like to see how this plays out, vaccination becoming a condition of employment for new employees.
Yeah.
Now, again, we've got a few different opinions on this one, but I do know that employment contracts are currently being drafted up that include the clauses that make vaccination a condition of employment. So that'll be kind of interesting when I reflect back on all of the different legislations that we've already covered. So I think that'll be interesting to keep an eye on.
It'll be interesting to see how that, going back to what we were talking about earlier, the crossover where people say, well, hang on, you've got it in my contract for employment, but I have reasons for not. I have, and
you're now discriminating against me.
Correct. Yeah, there's a bit more to play out there, I think.
Yeah.
In relation to the hybrid model and people working from home more as well, what obligations does an employer have to make sure that the at-home workplace for the employee, so they always have obligations when people are in their offices and their office space to make sure it's safe. What obligations does the employer have, particularly if they're mandating or saying to the employees, look, you will be working from home a few days a week or full time now? What's the obligation of the employer to make sure that the employee's home office is safe for work?
Look, from what we've seen from a legislative perspective, it's exactly the same as it was pre-COVID, which is pretty hefty in that I actually think that legislation needed to be updated a long time ago, really. I think it did a lot to discourage flexible work arrangements rather than encourage them. But, the legislation, I believe, still says that you've got to ensure that the workplace is set up appropriately and all that kind of stuff. When we were locked down last year for the first time, and that was pretty quick, if you remember, we had to move to it really quickly. This question came up quite a bit. And one of the things that we put in place, and I think this is still probably worth doing, is a checklist. So employees to do their own self-assessment on their own work area. And then, it doesn't have to be onerous, but just do that assessment. And then if there is anything that's really problematic, then you deal with that on a case-by-case basis. I mean, we had office chairs being couriered to people's homes. We had all sorts of things happening, but I don't think I'm the only one that's been on a Zoom call with somebody sitting at a kitchen table or sitting on a stool, or the cat's walking across, or so I'm hoping that common sense will prevail there, and that we'll see a more pragmatic approach when it comes to that, because the legislation implies that assessments have to be done. Well, that didn't happen last year.
No.
There's no way.
If employers are providing their employees with one of these checklists, would you recommend that the employer say, look, please complete this and send us a copy?
Yeah, I think, we did last. That's exactly what we did last year. Look, guys, just, without being the very policey about it, we just said, look, we just need to have this on record, because really all we want to do is protect our clients' or employers' interests as well as employees. But we want to just make sure that everybody's operating in a compliant way, and a paper trail around that stuff is a smart way to do that. So we did request those checklists to come back, and they're all uploaded onto everybody's electronic file.
Yeah, I think it's one of many things that's going to be a moving target, and hopefully updated. But Claire, with a number of these things, because obviously we're hopefully getting a bit closer to clarity, are you able to, so that we can keep everyone that was on the call and interested, anything that sort of comes to light, will you be able to circulate that, and we can certainly
for sure
share that with everyone as well?
No, for sure. And the other offer I would make as well, and we made it last year and we've been making it throughout the pandemic, there are 5 of us in the team. We're all very experienced. We offer complimentary quick phone call to discuss everyone's unique situation. We work predominantly in the small to medium sector, and that sector doesn't tend to have access to the resources that the big end of town have. So we're very happy to make that offer. In fact, I don't know what the best way is to get my calendar link. In fact, why don't I just put up, would it help if I put something in the chat, just our email address? Yeah. Let me just go ahead and do that. And then everyone's got that. So by all means, as I said, there are 5 of us, so either one of us can answer most questions. And if not, we've got the other 4 to rely on. Yeah,
and look, with all this being a moving target as well, I think, in the next week, in the next month, in the next few months, a lot of these will change.
Yeah.
Or be updated at least as well. And
for sure.
A little bit more clarity. So I think that'd be fantastic. And I can certainly vouch for your expertise in this area. So
thanks.
So look, I mean, is there anything else, sort of any general other observations that you sort of have to add, particularly for employers at the moment?
Look, I when this all started last year, I just had such empathy for, I think our legislative frameworks don't make it that easy to navigate and be a business owner, particularly in the small to medium sector. And I remember thinking, gosh, one more thing, and it's been a big thing. But one thing I can say, having surveyed our clients' teams a number of times over the course of the last 18 months, one of the most pleasing things has been the employees' perception on the support they feel that they've had from their leaders. And I just think that's absolutely fantastic. And, so congratulations, business owners out there, and by the way, that's not just the survey responses that we were getting. I've seen much broader survey samples that are all saying the same thing. So I think that speaks very well of leadership in Australia, whether it's just the sector we work in, which, all of our clients are fantastic in that respect, but just, stick at it. It's rule with empathy, but obviously with confidence. Rule's the wrong word. Lead with empathy and obviously with confidence. But I think businesses are doing a great job under really challenging conditions.
Yeah, and I think it's also too the businesses that proactively communicate as well.
Oh, completely,
getting out in front of it, because with that uncertainty, people just want something.
I think that's right.
A little bit of certainty.
And I think relationships are different. Like I think interpersonal relationships are generally stronger, because there hasn't been. I remember talking to one CEO last year, and he was kind of old school, and he said to me, I make a phone call to every single person in my business, so probably about 30 staff. Every week I'm on the phone in their lounge room for 10 minutes, just checking in to see how they're going. Not talking about work, just checking in to see how they're going. And I've heard that a lot. And I think that's great. And that makes for building strong interpersonal relationships it's going to be a better outcome for everyone.
I guess there's some habits that, that there's good and bad habits picked up through the pandemic, and that'd be one of the good habits that, if it can be continued, particularly by businesses going forward, will only be beneficial and shouldn't really need a pandemic to continue.
Yeah, no, for sure.
It's a good habit. So.
And one of the ones that maybe we might want to do something about, because I know this we've, again, through our surveys, we found people were working really long hours and not taking a break.
Yeah.
So we've had to be quite proactive and just reminding people, you get up in the morning, you go down to your computer or wherever you're set up for the day, and just remember to take those breaks as you would normally do.
We've even taken a step this week of getting each of the managers of each of the teams to proactively say to their teams, look, next year we want people to be taking their leave. Let's start booking in our leave now. Let's start looking to book in holidays, trips away, give ourselves something to look forward to, but we want people to take leave.
I think that's great. Yeah, we've got into this learned behavioural pattern of not taking breaks, right? So when do you switch off?
Yeah, I think that's really important.
I agree with you. Yeah.
So, all right, Claire. Well, thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who jumped online as well. And Claire's details are there. And look, if you write them down, or if you miss them, just reach out to me as well. We're more than happy to put you in touch with Claire. But look, again, going back to what I said at the very start, look, human resources is one of those things that businesses will often pay lip service to say, oh, look, people are our most important asset. But do they do much about HR? HR is everything from how you're onboarding people, how you're making sure that people are enjoying their role, that they understand what their role is, to any concerns they've got. It covers a whole range of things. And I think having support in that area is just, I think, increasingly something that's going to be more and more essential for businesses going forward. So, Claire, thank you very much for sharing your expertise.
Thanks so much for having me, Harry. Yeah, no, and, it's been great.
Yeah, and look, and any updates or anything that come out, we're more than happy to circulate them to everyone as well.
I'll be sure to send them through to you.
All right. Thank you very much. And thanks everyone for jumping online.
Thanks everyone.